3 sentences, 28 seconds out of a 28-minute speech, and by the next morning, they were the single most fought-over piece of American foreign policy language in weeks. Here's what almost nobody explains properly. Those 3 sentences are being read by 2 completely different audiences inside the same country at the same moment, as proof of 2 opposite things. That's not an accident. That's what strategic communication actually looks like when it's done on purpose. Stay with me on this one, because by the end you're going to understand something about how wars actually end that the news isn't going to tell you tonight. Right now, in Tehran, there are coffins in a courtyard. Hundreds of thousands of people are in the streets under red flags that mean blood vengeance. And 3 American sentences are being clipped, translated, and weaponized by people on opposite sides of the same government. So let's start with exactly what was said, because precision is the whole story here. Everyone heard the same 11 words. Almost nobody heard what the setting and the tense were actually doing. Mount Rushmore is not a neutral backdrop. It's 4 presidents carved permanently into stone: the founding, the expansion, the industrial rise, the republic held together. Standing under that to talk about Iran doesn't put the war in the news category. It puts it in the history category, not ongoing, filed, notice the tense, not we are knocking, not we have been engaged in, done, finished. That's a grammatical choice that quietly closes a campaign that is, in reality, still active, still disputed in Doha, still unresolved at a nuclear site nobody's allowed inside. They're dying to settle. That's not describing a negotiating partner. That's describing a defeated party so broken that mercy itself feels like the terms. We gave them a week off because we're nice. Read that again. Not we observed, not we respected. We gave them. America is the subject. Iran is the object. One government just decided, out loud, how another government is allowed to grieve. And if you think that was the extraordinary part, wait. Because the next day, it got a lot stranger. The day after Mount Rushmore, in an interview with Axios, the president said something that landed like a second shockwave on top of the first. During the 1 week set aside for Iran to bury its former leader, the sitting president of the United States acknowledged, on the record, that nearly the entire surviving senior leadership of Iran is gathered in a single place, and that the reason they're still alive isn't restraint, isn't law, isn't diplomacy, it's math. Because then we would have nobody to negotiate with. Sit with that for a second. The coffins are still in the courtyard, and the target is being described as preserved for negotiating leverage, not spared out of decency. Iran's embassy called it a lack of civilization. State media called it grotesque, and Iran's hardline factions needed 0 seconds to start using it. Which brings us to the part almost nobody is covering correctly, because the reaction inside Iran is not one reaction. It's 2, and they're fighting each other right now. There is a man who is technically the most powerful person in Iran, and he could not go to his own father's funeral. Iran right now has 2 factions pulling in opposite directions. A pragmatic faction, the president, the foreign minister, the parliamentary moderates, who want the deal closed, the frozen assets released, oil revenue flowing again, in a country running close to 70% inflation. And a hardline faction, IRGC commanders, ideological conservatives, who call the current agreement national capitulation, and who've already passed a law banning inspections of the bombed nuclear sites. And caught between both factions is a new supreme leader who cannot appear in public. Iranian security reportedly blocked his own request to attend his father's funeral. The fear being that Israel would kill him or trace his location. He's reportedly awaiting a prosthetic leg, has undergone hand surgery, has more facial reconstruction planned. One Iran analyst put it about as plainly as it can be put. He may be leader in name, but he answers to the Revolutionary Guard, not the other way around. If you're still with me, pause for a second, because here's the reset. Everything so far has been about what was said. What comes next is about what those words are actually doing, in real time, to a negotiation that has less than 4 weeks left on the clock. And there's a piece of physical, satellite-verified evidence coming up that changes how you should read every optimistic headline about this deal. So let's ask the real question. Does the Mount Rushmore speech help end this war, or make it harder to end? The hardliners and the pragmatists are looking at the exact same 3 sentences right now, and using them as opposite proof. For the hardliners, "We gave them a week off because we're nice," is a gift. It's humiliation fuel, ready clipped, ready translated, proof that settling means accepting charity from a superpower on terms the superpower sets. But, and this is the counterintuitive part, the same speech may be quietly helping the pragmatists too. Their argument to the hardliners has always been, the balance of power has actually changed. Don't bet on outlasting them. An American president publicly calling Iran defeated, with the world not really pushing back on that framing, is external validation the pragmatists couldn't manufacture themselves. In some systems, the adversary's public gloating gives a leader more cover to accept a deal than the adversary's polite respect would. Which one dominates in the next 25 days is genuinely unknowable from the outside. But there's one piece of this story you don't have to guess about, because it's sitting under a mountain and satellites can see it. Forget the speeches for a second. This is the part that actually determines if any of this deal means anything. There's a facility called Pickax Mountain, buried in the Zagros Range near Natanz. Construction started in 2020. No inspector has ever been inside. When the IAEA asked about it directly, the response was, "It's none of your business." The memorandum signed in June requires Iran to freeze construction at nuclear sites. This is a nuclear site. Construction is continuing, and inspectors haven't set foot in an Iranian nuclear facility since February 28th, the day the war started, the day Iran expelled them. Iran holds roughly 400 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60%. Weapons grade is 90%. That gap is real, but it is not the kind of gap that takes forever to close, especially at a facility that's still under construction and still closed to inspectors. And here's the sentence that should be in every headline about this deal. The vice president said last week that talks on the nuclear issue would start soon. Not have started, would start soon. The actual reason this war began is still, 4 months later, a future agenda item. So who else is watching all of this and doing math of their own? While the cameras are on Tehran and Mount Rushmore, 4 other capitals are quietly repricing everything. China holds a $400 billion cooperation agreement with Iran and is now recalculating what a desperate, defeated negotiating partner means for that deal. Russia signed a $25 billion nuclear reactor agreement with Iran back when Iran still had leverage. A weakened Iran is simply a different partner to have. Saudi Arabia is quietly recalibrating its own normalization plans around an Iran that's economically gutted and can't even get its own leader to a funeral. And European governments, already burned by a near doubling of gas prices during the blockade, are trying to figure out whether American confidence means the deal is closing or means Washington's ready to escalate again if it doesn't. And then there's the audience almost nobody talks about, 90 million Iranians. Some genuinely grieving, some performing grief because the alternative is dangerous, some watching from an apartment, feeling something in between. Near 70% inflation doesn't care which category you're in. So here's where that leaves us, with 25 days on the clock and one uncomfortable question underneath all of it. Is this administration negotiating for real nuclear security, or for a deal it can simply call a victory? Those are not the same goal. A deal where Iran makes a public promise and oil tankers start moving through the strait again is enough to validate the Mount Rushmore story back home. It does not require the kind of verifiable, inspectable compliance that actually prevents a nuclear weapon. The inspection ban, the mountain that keeps growing, hundreds of kilograms of unaccounted material, those can either get resolved in the next 25 days or quietly filed as details to work out later. That's the gap this entire video has been circling, and it's not going to close itself, it's going to close, or tear open, in public, on a timeline you can actually track. So here's what to actually watch, starting today. Whether the Supreme Leader appears in public before the funeral ends on July 9th, whether IAEA inspectors get anywhere near Pickax Mountain before the 60-day window runs out, and whether what comes out of Doha next month is something specific and verifiable, or another set of confident sentences that can't be checked against a satellite photo. Which one of those three do you think breaks first? The funeral, the mountain, or the deadline? Put your best guess in the comments, and I'll reply to as many as I can. Because the next update on this, the one where we find out which version of this ending was real, is already being written, and I'm not done watching it.